All right, let's talk about something we've all been through. You know, that tense meeting about a project deadline, or that awkward silence about who has to work the weekend shift? We tend to think of conflict as this terrible thing we have to avoid at all costs. But what if that's all wrong? What if conflict is actually a normal, even healthy, part of getting things done together? Today, we're going to tear down the process of conflict and figure out how to make it work for us, not against us.
So, let's kick things off with a huge question. Is all conflict actually bad for business? You might think the answer is a clear yes, but it's not. The simple answer is no. Of course, conflict can absolutely tear relationships apart and sink projects. But, and this is a big but, it can also be the very spark that leads to incredible innovation and necessary change. It really all comes down to how we handle it.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to completely redefine what we even mean by conflict. Then, we'll trace its life cycle, from a tiny spark to a full-blown fire. After that, we'll get personal and look at your go-to conflict style, before moving into some more advanced tactics. We'll also see why context is everything, and wrap up with a pretty radical new way to think about the whole thing.
Okay, first up, conflict isn't the enemy. Look, before we can even begin to manage disagreements, we all have to get on the same page about what conflict really is. And trust me, it's way more than just a loud argument.
I know, this looks like a textbook definition, but it actually gives us a fantastic way to think about this. I call it the 3 I's. First, you've got interaction. Conflict isn't just a bad feeling. It becomes real through communication. Second, interdependence. This is key. We can want totally different things, but it only becomes a conflict if our jobs are linked, if I need you and you need me. And third, incompatible goals. This is the core of it, the belief that what I want gets in the way of what you want.
All right, so now that we know what conflict is, let's look at how it happens. Because conflicts don't just pop up out of nowhere. They actually grow and evolve through a pretty predictable cycle. And if you can figure out which phase you're in, you've got a much better shot at handling it.
These are the 5 phases. So, picture this. You and a coworker have to write a report. Phase 1, latent conflict, is just the fact that you have different work styles. The tinder is dry. Phase 2, perceived conflict, is when you realize, uh-oh, we have very different ideas about this. Phase 3 is felt conflict. Now it gets personal. You start to feel annoyed, maybe a little stressed, and you start planning what you're going to say. Phase 4, manifest conflict, is the actual disagreement, the debate, the tense emails, the meeting where it all comes out. And finally, you have the conflict aftermath. This is what's left over, the feelings, the decisions, the impact on your working relationship, for good or for bad.
And here's the thing, this stuff doesn't just happen between two people. It happens at every level. You've got your classic interpersonal conflict with a teammate. But you also have intergroup conflict, like when the sales and marketing teams are battling over the budget. And it even goes bigger, to interorganizational conflict, when 2 companies are competing head-to-head.
Okay, now let's make this a little more personal. When you get into a disagreement, what's your gut reaction? What's your default setting? In this section, we're going to look at a simple way to figure out your go-to approach.
It's actually pretty simple. It all boils down to just 2 things. On one hand, you have how much you care about getting what you want, and on the other hand, you have how much you care about the other person getting what they want. The tug-of-war between those 2 concerns is what determines your style.
And that little tug-of-war gives us 5 basic styles. As I go through these, see which one sounds the most familiar. Are you a competitor? That's the I win, you lose approach. Or do you lean toward accommodation, where it's you win, I lose? Maybe you're an avoider. You just pretend the problem doesn't exist. Then there's compromise, the classic let's meet in the middle, where everyone gives a little. And finally, the holy grail, collaboration, where you work your tail off to find a solution where you both win.
Let's use that weekend shift example to make this super clear. The competition approach is you marching over and saying, you have to work this weekend, my plans are locked in. Your needs get met, theirs get totally ignored. Accommodation is the exact opposite. It's you saying, oh, don't worry about it, I'll take the shift, even if it means canceling your own important plans. See the difference? 2 totally different mindsets, and they lead to 2 vastly different places.
But here's the catch. It's not that simple. Your style isn't set in stone. This quote points out a huge flaw in just focusing on styles. It ignores the world around you. The way you handle a conflict with your boss is probably very different from how you'd handle it with a peer, right? The company culture, the power dynamics, all of that plays a massive role. Your style doesn't exist in a vacuum.
So, if it's not all about our personal styles, what else is in the playbook? Well, that brings us to more formal strategies. Sometimes you need to level up to the art of bargaining and negotiation.
Now, bargaining isn't your everyday disagreement over lunch spots. Think of it as a more structured game with clear rules. It's what happens in union negotiations or when two companies are hammering out a merger. There's a formal back and forth of proposals, all aimed at one thing: reaching a final, binding settlement.
And when you get down to it, there are two main flavors of bargaining. First, there's distributive bargaining. This is the classic win-lose, fixed pie situation. The goal is to get the biggest slice for yourself, which means the other person gets less. Communication is cagey. You hide your cards. But then you have integrative bargaining. This is a total mind shift. The goal here isn't to slice up the pie, it's to make the pie bigger. It's a win-win approach where you openly share information to find creative solutions that nobody had thought of before.
Okay, this next part is so important. We've hinted at it, but let's dive in. Context is everything. You absolutely cannot understand a conflict by just looking at the people involved. You have to look at the environment it's happening in, because that context changes the entire game.
So what kind of context are we talking about? Well, there are personal factors, like how you frame the situation in your own head. Do you see it as a threat to be fought off or an opportunity to gain something? Then there are relational factors. Power matters, big time. You're probably not going to use the same strategy with your CEO as you would with an intern. And finally, cultural factors. The unwritten rules of your company, your country, they all dictate what's considered a normal way to disagree.
And get this, here's a finding that might completely blow up your assumptions. All those stereotypes we carry around about men being competitive and women being accommodating in conflicts, research shows they just don't hold up. The data is clear. Gender and personality have a surprisingly small impact. What matters way more is the situation, the context, the power you hold. That's the real driver.
And that brings us to our final section, and it's a big one. It challenges the very foundation of how we've been taught to seek conflict. What if the goal wasn't just to get a good deal, but to actually achieve a deeper level of understanding?
Take a look at these two models. On the left, you've got the traditional way of thinking. It's all about transactions, making trades, exchanging info, reaching a settlement where we both gain something. It's a negotiation. But on the right, you have a totally different philosophy. This co-constructionist or feminist model isn't about trading. It's about building something new together. The goal isn't just to solve the immediate problem, it's to use the conflict as a chance to share experiences, ask genuine questions, and transform the relationship itself through real mutual understanding. So, I want to leave you with this one final thought to chew on. If conflict isn't a battle that has to be won, what could it be instead? Maybe it's a puzzle to be solved together, or an invitation to understand someone else's world a little bit better. Maybe, just maybe, it's an opportunity. Thanks for digging into this with me.